Now you have genomics at your disposal, right? As a commercial operator, that's a revolutionary thing, in my opinion, because now not only do you have her actual phenotypic performance, but you also have a sense of what's under the hood, right? Genetically, what kind of potential is there? And what we found is the difference in feedlot performance between a top 25% feedlot indexing steer and a bottom 25% feedlot indexing steer is about $90. Testing the right heifer can make you about $500 additional over her lifetime. The return on investment on that is unbelievable.
Welcome to the Future Beef Show in partnership with Drovers and Breedr. This is the place to connect with people, innovations, and success stories shaping the next era of beef production. I'm your host, Jim Johnson from Brands and Barbed Wire. As usual, I've got my global specialists with us today, Dr. Jessica Sperber, feedlot specialist from the University of Nebraska, and Ian Wheal, founder of Breedr, the cattle tech company championing producer-led beef supply chains. As always, you'll find additional resources and tools at thefutureofbeef.com with a free trial to Breedr app to take your operation to the next level. Our guest today is Nick Jorgensen, CEO of Jorgensen Land and Cattle. He'll share how genetic selection drives profitability and consistency in beef production. So let's get started. Today, we've got a special guest with us, Nick Jorgensen, Jorgensen Land and Cattle. But before we get into Nick, Ian, why don't you kick us off and tell us what the show's going to be about today?
Thank you very much, Jim. Nick, welcome. And yeah, today, look, really exciting episode for me. We're going to be talking about genomics, and I think it's great to have Nick here. Their group as an organization, they've gone full on into genomics. They've adopted it across their organization and work with their producers. And we'll hear all about that today. But I think the exciting thing about where genomics is, it used to be, you'd use it for years, Jim, on your seed stock operation. But now we're starting to see it get to a level where it can be adopted more broadly. We're starting to see it in feeder cattle. We're starting to see it across cow-calf operations. And that's really starting to change and shift how we can improve genetics in a much more rapid way. So, yeah, very excited to have Nick here today, and yeah, looking forward to the episode.
Awesome. So, Nick, for maybe the viewers that don't know about Jorgensen Land and Cattle, why don't you give us a little background on Jorgensen Land and Cattle before we jump into the topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Nick Jorgensen, I'm the CEO of Jorgensen Land and Cattle, located in Ideal, South Dakota, which is south central part of the state. Family's been there for 116 years, homesteaded there in 1909 when the Tripp County opened up to homesteading. We're in the seed stock Angus business. We raise black Angus bulls, and we're actually the largest seed stock producer in the United States. 2024, we marketed probably just shy of 6,000 bulls, and I'm going to guess in 2025, we'll get to about 6,250, more or less bulls. Large part that's done through a lease program, which is a pretty uncommon thing in the seed stock industry. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's takes a special skill set to pull that off. But it's really what kind of propels us to being the largest seed stock producer, and therefore, probably the largest single source of feeder calves when you talk about our bulls, and then the herds that we influence across the United States. We estimate there's close to 200,000 feeder calves that come directly out of our bulls in a given year. So that's the main thing we do, but we've got a lot of other things we do at Jorgensen Land and Cattle as well. We've got a feedlot there where all the bulls are developed in Ideal, a large farming operation to support that feedlot. We have a fertilizer business. We also have a hunting lodge that we're actually in the process of converting into a sporting club. We're building an 18-hole golf course on it. So into a lot of different things, but ultimately our widget, so to speak, is the Black Angus bull. I'd also be remiss not to mention I'm in business with my dad, my cousin, my uncle, and myself. We're the four owners. And then we've got about 40 employees in Tripp County.
Oh, well. Yep. Yeah, and you guys have kind of been innovators from the beginning. You think outside the box and do things a little bit differently, and like the bull leasing program and some of those things. And so long history of sort of being in the forefront of the cattle business. So yeah, this will be interesting. So tell us, some other of the innovative things that Jorgensen does, and specifically maybe around your evaluation and genomics and some things like that. Yeah.
So we have, it's a partnership with Zoetis currently today, excuse me. we got a partnership with Zoetis where they run a genetic evaluation that is based entirely off of our herd of animals. And when I say our herd of animals, it's the cows that we run in Ideal, all the bulls that are raised either on our ranch or through our cooperator ranches, and then a significant amount of cooperator females. And we're actually starting to delve into testing customer calves. So those that buy or lease bulls from us, genetically testing those as well. We started that with Zoetis back in 2018. And at the time, and I think maybe even still today, they're one of the very few single ranch genetic evaluations in the United States. And the reason that we were able to do that is just the sheer number of phenotypes that we can gather specifically on breeding stock animals. It takes a lot of data and a lot of good data to stand up a genetic evaluation. And there's just not very many places you can go that have that many phenotypes specifically on bulls, right? As a matter of fact, there's no other place you can go that would have that many. And so that's kind of what sets up the foundation for that evaluation. We did it for a multitude of reasons. And, we thought it was a unique opportunity. We also felt that, there's lots of genetic evaluation options in the United States, but you start talking about extended geographies and different management systems in different ranches. And sometimes you're not always, when it comes down to the phenotype, right, the actual weight measurement or, the actual scrotal measurement or whatever it is that's getting fed into that evaluation, you're not always talking apples to apples, right? And inside of our system, we are always talking apples to apples because ultimately some progeny out of any animal that's tested, either it touched Ideal at some point, right? And we had control of that management at some point. So we feel that, we've got a really good foundational phenotypic database that just spits out really good predictions ultimately. And we've got a lot of faith in them and are leveraging them not only in our herds and our cooperator herds, but delving into consulting with our customers as well on the genomics in their herds.
Yeah. Interesting. So I know, like with breed associations, and they do a good job, but they don't always get the cleanest contemporary groups. They don't always get the cleanest data that comes in. And then it's sort of up to them on what new traits they add. And so, I think one of the advantages with you guys is that you control the contemporary groups. They're always clean. You know what's in there. The data's always good. And then if you want to add a specific trait that's unique to your operation, you can do that. Have you done some of that?
Yeah, we have. Before I talk about it, I want to just, and you can cut this out if it's too. But I think one of the things that it's really special about a single source evaluation, so to speak, is it's not a competitive mechanism, right? We're using it to better our animals in our system, and no one in that system is incentivized to make their animals look better, make them look better, right? Mm-hmm. And, there's a lot of evaluations where I'm comparing my cattle against yours, and if mine are better, they're going to sell for more than yours. It's not that way in our system, so there's no incentive for poor phenotypes. So, but back to, I forgot the second part of that question.
Oh yeah, no. So unique traits.
Yeah.
Yep.
So speaking specifically about unique traits, you mentioned that, with some evaluations they choose, the people who run that choose, well, myself and my cousin Cody are effectively the board for the Ideal Beef evaluation, right? So we ultimately get the say of whether we're going to add new traits or not. And having Zoetis as a partner has been really great because one of the things we've had access to is their R&D team. And on an annual basis, we talk about, hey, what new traits can we do, right? Because you can want to do a trait, but you need to have the data to do that trait, right? And a sufficient amount of data to do it. So we've done several over the last 6 years. Most notably, I would call out our breeding soundness exam EPD. We semen test and we perform more breeding soundness exams on bulls than anyone else probably in the world, right? And so we have an immense amount of breeding soundness exam phenotypes. And in our business, one of the financially worst things that can happen to us is we buy a bull calf from one of our cooperators for a premium, and then we find out he's just going to make a feeder calf because he can't breed cows for whatever reason. And so we pulled out all of our phenotypes related to breeding soundness exams with the idea of let's try and predict with genomics the likelihood that this bull is is going to pass a breeding soundness exam. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into that, right? Some of which are environmental and we can't control, but there are also genetic factors. And we found a really good trait, actually, that when paired with some environmental observations, we get a really good sense of, by the time those animals arrive in our feedlot, which ones aren't going to make it. So we've actually been able to cut our semen test calls back to about 10 to 15% raw. So, historically we're going to shoot for 20% that fail. And we've been able to cut out about 10 to 15% of those that we're just identifying before, 120 days before we can get them into the beef system and turn them into a feeder animal.
Yeah. So it has to be a pretty big economic incentive there, because if you're talking about 600 bulls normally that you would fail, you're dropping that down to 300
two
or
or
so.
three.
Yeah.
And it's not like, we still end up calling about the same amount. It's just you're pulling that window so far ahead that it's really not fun to turn a bull into a feeder animal when he's 13 months old. It's a lot more palatable to do that when he's 10 or 11 months old.
Well, and it sets him up way better for success in the feed yard. That's very, very critical.
It is.
Some of these late cut bulls coming into the yard they're already at the end of their period of the time that you need to be castrating them and getting them into the yard. So that's really effective. Yeah,
it is. It's just, we try and avoid that situation as much as possible. And you're never going to get 100%, right? Because that's just not how genomics works. But man, it's nice to be able to make that number a lot smaller.
So Nick, I'm really interested, where you are now, you're making huge strides. You can see how it's changing the management style that you've got on the operation. But if you think back to before it started, how did you deal with that as a company, as a group? What culturally made you go, we're going to go after this genomics? We think it's the best thing for us. How do you get that cultural change? That's a big change in an industry that's dominated by breed associations, for you to say, I'm going to go in on genomics. How did you manage that internally? How did your uncle, your cousin sit down and go, let's do it?
So it would have been my cousin Cody who started the whole genomics path, and it started, man, it was before I was back in the operation. So when we were working with Larry Grand, some of the original, wouldn't even know Jim, some of the original tests we were doing, but Cody grabbed onto that early, and we used whatever tools were commercially available to us. But when we had the opportunity to have a evaluation specific to us, for Cody and I, it was an absolute no-brainer. Our business is so much different, and frankly, our breeding philosophy to a pretty high degree is so probably it's very unique in the breed, and it just the tools that were at our disposal at the time just weren't meeting our needs. They weren't meeting our needs. So from a cultural perspective, Ian, it was an absolute no-brainer. Now to try and explain to a team that has to sell some purebred animals, some registered animals, a lot of full-blood Angus, non-registered bulls, it's a little bit of a lift, but really it's because we have to explain to the customer, hey, these are our EPDs, and these don't come from, the evaluation that you're used to hearing about. Here's why we do that. So it's a sales thing, right? And so culturally with the customer, it's something that you've got to kind of eclipse, but it doesn't take long for them to see the value, as long as we can get them to kind of trust us at first, right? I mean, having the trust from the customers is what it takes to make that work.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you said culturally, Ian. I think Jorgensen as a culture, as we talked about earlier, has been innovators, right? And so culturally, that's just it's natural for them to jump into something like this. I think what we look at sometimes is the benefit of it. And the nice thing about an evaluation that like we talked about before, an evaluation where they can really hone in on the traits that are unique to them, that they want to produce and they want to carry down to their commercial customers, and hopefully will make their commercial customers more profitable, right?
Yep.
And so what's interesting is, I wonder, as you've added more genotypes to the evaluation, how much more accuracy and predictability have you been able to see?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing to discuss, because for years we relied on the Angus evaluation, and for an evaluation to work, you've got to have phenotypes, you've got to have progeny, things like that. Well, and I could have this incorrect, but I'm fairly certain I don't. To get into the Angus evaluation, largely to get results, they've got to be purebred, right? Well, with ours, they don't. There's no registration requirement, right? So when you look at some of our high use sires, right? So you're talking like our AI sires and things like that. We have, in some instances, like 10 to 15 times the amount of progeny in our evaluation as the progeny that sits in the Angus evaluation for the same bull, right? What makes these evaluations more accurate is more observations and more progeny. So just naturally, when you look at a bull that we use strong AI and our commercial customers use strong AI, he might have 500 calves in the Angus evaluation. He literally has 4,000 to 5,000 in our evaluation, right? And so just from an accuracy perspective, that's where that value comes in. Now, do we have that on all the animals in our evaluation? Absolutely not, right? Because a lot of these are commercial bulls that we might have no progeny records on, just depending on whether the customer's testing those calves. But for those high use sires, for sure, we've seen, and statistically, we can show that the trait accuracies are a lot higher than what we'd get out of Angus.
Well, and the beauty of the genomic evaluation is now that relationship matrix behind the scenes allows you to tie those other bulls into those bulls that are higher use and have a higher progeny. And so that genomic relationship is really what you're trying to explain with a genomic evaluation on top of a regular evaluation.
100%. And the other thing about our breeding philosophy that helps is Cody manages the genetics in our herd very tightly, right? It's a highly inbred herd. And so what all that does is it further creates that web, right, of connectivity between the pedigrees. And so we just have an even higher degree of accuracy on animals that maybe have less observations, of progeny or phenotypes, just because they're so tied in with the genomics of other animals in that evaluation.
Can you explain sort of those? I think you have 3 lines. Is that right?
Yeah.
How's that work?
There's 3 main ones that would be common, people would be aware of. So you have the Rito line, you have the Traveler line, the Eldorado line, and then we also leverage the Emulus and the emulation line to a degree. But those would kind of be the main 5. But the 3 big ones are Rito, Traveler, and Eldorado. And actually, another really cool part about just having access to an R&D team at Zoetis is, a lot of these evaluations, they don't do it at Angus, but on ours is we get genomic predicted breed composition as well. And actually inside of that, over the last couple of years, the Zoetis R&D team has actually been helping us to genetically parse out sire lines. So not only do we know that this animal is 99% Angus, but we actually know that he is 70% Rito and 20% Traveler and 10% Eldorado, which it just helps us get a better sense of how we should be breeding, where we should be using him, or if those cows have been tested. All right, so what do we need to be using on these cows, to maximize the line crossing and the philosophy that we use in our herd. Really cool thing that, once again, most herds don't have the data and the ability to access something like that.
What's interesting, you mentioned the Rito line, and actually my master's work was a terminal sire study comparing Rito revenue to a Simmental, a Charolais, and then a clone prime yield grade 1 carcass.
That's how the Charolais go.
They did excellent, as expected. No, so it was interesting that you bring that up.
Well, it's so interesting, fun fact, right? What percentage of the Angus population out there has some sort of connection to Jorgensen?
I think it's 93%.
Yeah.
Of pedigreed animals through the American Angus Association will touch a bull that was either bred in Ideal or was owned by our ranch at some point in time.
Yeah.
And a lot of that goes back to, to the 60s and 70s, Rito 149, the sire of Traveler that everyone knows about was born in Ideal. Things like that.
So just about any Angus bull you would have used in your research study would have had a connection to Jorgensen.
So Nick, you mentioned 200,000 feeder calves probably in the market due to your bulls. how many of those calves would have genomic testing done on them, but then also phenotypes as calves on a commercial operation?
Very few. And I think, in my opinion, that's a problem in our industry, that people, and I don't know who to blame for it. As a matter of fact, if I'm going to blame anyone, I'm going to blame Jorgensen Land and Cattle, and I'll blame Zoetis and the people that run these evaluations. We haven't done the best job of explaining and selling the value of that genetic test on those feeders, right? Because you're gonna put a calf into a feedlot, and you're gonna say, yeah, you should spend $20 or $30 or $40 on a genetic test. The first question you're gonna get is why? Why would I do that? Why would I spend that additional $20 or $30? Because in some cases, that's my margin.
Well, but it's interesting though. I've seen that really change in the last while, and I think the one thing everyone shies away from also is beef on dairy. But I'd have to say one of the things that's been really interesting in beef on dairy is we're pulling data from the dairy of what the AI went in. So we're not having to genomically test, but we're able to get the sire to a level of accuracy. It's not perfect because those maternity wards are crazy. But you're able to start now getting sires. So, even in stuff where Breedr's done supply chains, we've got 20,000 head with sires next to them, and you can start to see how the actual information, you take that information and what it can do to a lot of cattle and how you can choose how you're going to feed them, or where they're going to marble, where they're not going to marble, what grid you should target. I think that experience from there, we're seeing the ability for that to be applied to beef with genomics. And I think that's where I get excited is like, you take those 200,000 head, we could start to say which sire they came from. Are they high propensity marbling? Are they not high propensity marbling? Are they high growth? Are they low marbling? Like, you're going to target different grids, right? And I think that's where it gets exciting. It's like, but now it is like, I'm really interested to know how you then, or how do we, like, we're doing a bit of that. We've been doing some evaluations where we'd link it to carcass back to it. You guys are trying to do it. I know you own some of your own cattle and you buy some back as well. How do we engage with the cow calf? Like, let's address that challenge. Like, how would, as a person who's got Zoetis experience, you, us, and a feeder, like, how do we get these guys to see this value?
Yeah. So here's my opinion, and you make a really good point on identifying sire. We've studied it in our herd, and we don't have a ton of feeder animals because we're in the bull business, right? Every feeder animal that we come up with generally is one we don't want. Right, because they were supposed to be bulls. But the last couple of years, we've been deliberate about buying calves from our customers, and really the idea was to test what can we do with genomics if we have them. Well, what kind of difference can we make in a feeder system? So we test these calves, and knowing sire is great, but it does not get you all the way. It can explain 30, 35, 40% of the variation in those calves. When we fully genomic test them, what we found is the difference in feedlot performance between a top 25% feedlot indexing steer and a bottom 25% feedlot indexing steer is about $90, right? So your $20, $30 test, and you got an opportunity to pick up $90 in performance. To me, so there's your money spent. But the question is, well, why would I spend it on that one that's going to produce less? Right. So I've got to eat up that cost of the test in the top half that are good. But the answer is you got so many different ways in the industry today to place cattle. Right. So I can find my really good ones that I know are going to hit the feedlot and make me really good money, perform well. That's what you do with them. You identify your bottom performers. Maybe they go into a different program, right? That fits their abilities better, right? Where maybe you can add some premium in a gap program or something like that, right? Where they can't produce enough on their own. We got to add value to them a different way. But to pull that off, the test really needs to be done before they ever get to the feedlot, right? Because these things don't turn quickly, right? So if you're going to place an animal and pull that DNA sample the day they get there, you're not going to have results for maybe another 45 to 60 days. Well, you've already eaten up a good chunk of the feeding period. So in my opinion, to your point, well, we need to convince ranchers that the time to do it is, frankly, before these calves go out to grass.
Yeah, and I would say it's like, you can get something done at branding, then they can hit the feed yard, you can sort them straight away. And we've seen like $120 difference.
Yeah.
But I think the other challenge is there that you've got people just trying to sell a test, right? And that is what they like, the genotyping companies make their money on, is it's $20. But what we've seen is half the value sits with the cow calf guy and half the value sits with the feed yard. So really you should be splitting that cost $10 each way because the cow-calf guy is going to be finding out which bulls did well, which cows did well. He can cull much better. And the feed yard's going to be knowing which one's going to marble, which should go into a different program. And, you almost need to have them connected into some sort of supply chain for it to really hum.
You're right, Ian. And I don't disagree. That's probably the way this goes. I mean, the other one is that that the market develops a premium for animals that are genetically tested, right? And when you're transparent with the data and you're willing to show, look, here's the genomics on this set of animals, they theoretically should be worth more, right? Because you've got better insight into how they're going to perform
and how you should feed them.
Ever wondered if you could be getting more out of your cattle?
Breedr is the first technology company that's able to track and optimize cattle from conception all the way to the rail. This puts the power of data into the hands of the rancher and enables them to improve their profit line quicker than they ever have before.
My decision to partner with Breedr was made largely after seeing a demo where I realized what Breedr's doing is unlike anyone else in our industry. Connecting the data from the packing plant back to the feedlot, the stocker backgrounders, and the cow-calf, even connecting that data to the purebred breeder, will just open the door to improvement at a scale and a speed that we have never seen in this industry before.
I believe Breedr's putting ranchers in the driver's seat. We can make breeding decisions based on large amounts of data very quickly. The calves that are produced, they have a higher cutout value, their ribeyes are more profitable, and it plays back to us.
As I'm out around the country, people are asking me about Breedr, and I always recommend Breedr. It's the tool for the future.
The cost they can't all be borne on the rancher unless he's retaining.
Yeah.
Right. If he's retaining ownership, then that's a different story. But he definitely gets value in that. We're talking about feeder calves, but in my opinion, there's actually a larger impact when you look at it from a female selection side.
Yeah.
Right. So as a commercial operator, which 90% of our 700 customers are commercial operators, maybe even 95%. For years and years and years, what selection tools have they had at their disposal? When they're out there selecting a heifer, trying to decide which ones they're going to keep in their herd, what selection tools have they had at their disposal? It's been
they get
a weight, maybe a weight on that heifer when she comes through when they wean them, how she looks that day. They maybe have a sense of how her mother performed, right, historically, a sense of how the sire has performed historically. But largely it's phenotype, and it's how she looks and behaves the day she runs through the alley when they're sorting, right?
Yep.
With our genetic evaluation and with most genetic evaluations today, I'll speak specifically about ours. Now you have genomics at your disposal, right? As a commercial operator, that's a revolutionary thing, in my opinion, because now not only do you have her actual phenotypic performance, but you also have a sense of what's under the hood, right? Genetically, what kind of potential is there? And so we work with so you mentioned not just selling a test, right? So we sell this test to our customers, but it comes along with consulting on our behalf, right? Zoetis can't really do that.
Yeah.
Because Zoetis is going to sell you a test and are they going to recommend what bulls you should use? And whose bulls do they recommend you use? They can't. They're not positioned in the marketplace to say you should use Jorgensen bulls or this breeder's bulls or this one specifically. Well, we are, right? Because that's what our customers are coming to us for is what bulls should I use? So we can not only sell them a test, but we can sell them the expertise behind what to do with it. Because I can tell you that most people, when they look at the results of a genetic evaluation, it goes right over their head. And I mean, no offense to that, but it's a whole bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet. And it's unless you spend all of your day looking at stuff like that, it's overwhelming and doesn't make sense.
Well, and we keep adding more numbers.
Yep.
And it's almost like we've gone too far. So the seed stock guy might understand it, he's really into it, but we almost should peel back 10 of those numbers for the cow-calf guy and be like, here's 4.
Or have someone that can explain to them, all right, look, here's what this trait means, and maybe it's not important to you, or have indices that roll these traits together that then help make sense of them. But so what we do is we sit down with our customers. We get the results. They test their heifers, for example, because that's usually the use case. Is they test them. We get the results in, and then we actually sit down and go over them with them, right? And we ask them, what do you want out of a female in your herd? What things do you look for? What things do you not particularly worry about? And then we help them select, right? And so a lot of times, you know, if I could walk through an ideal use case for genomic testing in a commercial herd, it would be test all of your calves at branding time.
Yep.
Right now, you'll hear the debate, well, we rope and drag, how are we going to pull that off? And
they don't even give a suckling calf implant because of the labor challenge with it.
So there's a labor challenge there, but I can assure you that if you are deliberate about it, there's a way to handle that one. But if you can pull DNA on those calves before they ever go out to grass, by the time they're weaned and you're pulling them off grass, you can know in large part where every one of those calves is going to go, right? So you can look at your heifers, for example, and we can have a really good sense of genomically, here's the heifers that I want to keep. And generally when we go through this exercise with our customers, we leave phenotypical leeway, right? So run through the math. I've got 100 heifers and I want to keep 50 of them. We'll sit down and go through, all right, which 70 of these fit the genomic profile that we want to keep in our herd? Once we've identified those 70, that we said, take this list, go sort them. Go sort these 70 off your eye, off the scale, however you prefer to do it. So you end up with your 50 that not only meets your phenotypic needs, but meets your genomic needs as well. Then let's look at the steers, right? And let's figure out how we can, let's spend some time figuring out how we can best place these things. Because I've got a sense that, you know, every herd is going to have a top 25% and a bottom 25%. What are we going to do with all those? So when it comes time to pull these off the cow, we can start managing them the right way.
Yeah. And I think there's 2 points to that. There is that initial hurdle of getting your cows tested the first time, which is an expense. But once you've done that, you then have those tests there to do parentage and do a bunch of stuff afterwards. And so, you know, I think that's the interesting thing. You're not having to redo everything every year, and you get like 5 years benefit out of what you do. I think the other point, which I'd want to pull up on, is the whole, like, we rope and drag, it's too hard. Like every ranch we deal with that uses our app to put an EID in the air at rope and dragging, they're like, this is the time of year that we have the most hands.
Yeah.
Like to be able to have someone there who just sticks in it, match pair, TSU. Like we've developed something with Allflex where we'll put in a match pair, EID, TSU, and dangle tag.
Yep.
It's all there. It's in one thing. You're just putting an EID in the air and you're getting a tissue sample at the same time. Like it's so easy, and you never have more hands on the ranch than you do it
at branding time.
So it's like, it almost feels counterintuitive when people say we don't have time to do that.
Yeah, it is. But you know, it's one of those things that you got to take that walk with your customer and try and show that value. Because I think a lot of times that's just a proxy for, I'm nervous about spending that 30, 35, you know, whatever the price of the genetic test is. And I'm gonna scapegoat the fact that I just can't do it labor wise, but really I'm just nervous about spending the money. But I can tell you, you know, we just talked about the value of testing a feeder and identifying those low performing versus high performing animals. To me, there's more value, and we've actually shown it in testing those heifers. And the value really comes from making sure that I don't retain one of those bottom 30% or 25% heifers. And what she's going to cost you from lost production because she's not good. In our estimation, that testing the right heifer can make you about $500 additional over her lifetime. If you know she's the one that's going to raise those good feeder calves and not be a loser, the return on investment on that is unbelievable. You know, 9-10x what you're going to spend on a DNA test, and that's if you test all your heifers. And then you're still going to get the question, well, why would I test the ones that I know I'm not going to keep? And the answer is, so you know you shouldn't keep her. Right. You actually know. You're guessing otherwise.
Yeah. So if you reframe it differently, you're going to lose $500. So
exactly.
By spending $30, you're saving yourself $500 over that lifetime. So.
Well, and I think, you know, for commercial breeders, it seems like, commercial customers, it seems like the genomics can be overwhelming. But if we just simply say it's a rank of your heifers, you're simply just ranking your heifers to pick your trade or pick your index, but you're essentially ranking your heifers top to bottom, you know, on specific traits, and that's really all it is. They get overwhelmed with the GPD, GEPD, or something like that, and it's just a rank, and just treat it that way. But the other thing that's interesting is, you know, we get back to the feed yard side of it and testing feeder calves. You know, it's really been, what do we do with the calves, and how do we manage that bottom end, right? Yep. And figuring out what the optimum way to manage those better to recoup that cost. And I think we just have never really done a lot of research and figured out how to manage those better. And so, looking at from a feedlot researcher, those are opportunities, I think, that you guys are probably looking at, is how do we use this information to better place and manage those feeder calves?
Yeah, so over the last few years, in partnership with our geneticist at UNL, Matt Spangler, we've TSU'd every feedlot calf that we bring into our university feedlot. And that allows us the opportunity to, go back and maybe look at these ones didn't perform, but why? But then also when you actually look at a controlled research setting and you have one pen that's on the same treatment as another pen and they're falling out on certain traits, you can go back and look through, okay, is this an anomaly because of environment, et cetera? Or is it truly because their genetics are different? And, we stratify and sort to make sure that not every group of cattle is bought from the same place and put in the same pen, but there still is those opportunities for anomalies, and that data is so critical. I did want to mention too, to your point, Nick, on the dollar value return for the commercial producer, and sometimes they just can't see that because they've never had the opportunity to see it. I think a lot of that starts with most of them don't even birth weight their calves, right? As a commercial producer, they don't take a weaning weight on their calves before they're taking them to the auction market, right? They're letting the auction system sort their calves into what the heavies and what the lights are going to be. And maybe that group could have been retained for 3 weeks, fed for a little bit heavier, and go in as a more uniform group. So, I think we need to start with the big challenges, like maybe getting a scale on your operation. And then that can help you view, okay, genomically, this heifer is better in this regard because she is going to give me a bigger calf. And it was proven last year when she's a first calver, second year calver, what is her calf doing? And what kind of weaning weight are they giving me?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it really gets down to, and I think the industry is going to get there, because feed yards are all about managing risk, right? And if you take a set of calves that have been treated exactly the same environmentally, right? Same feed, same mineral, same vaccines, everything else, and then you put them in a feed yard, there's still a huge difference in the value of those calves when they're in the feed yard, right? And that's largely all genetics. And so being able to pick out the top end and manage those to their optimum, and then manage the bottom end to their optimum, I think that discovering what those values are is where we need to be in this.
It's interesting that you bring that up specifically, right? Because one of the things that we did last year with the feeders that we bought, and we're not talking about a huge number here, let's just call it 800 of them, 800 to 1,000, is we stratified and sorted them on genomics before they went to the feed yard, and we did it 4 different ways. It was high genetic potential and high phenotypic performance at backgrounding, and then high genetic potential, low phenotypic performance, and then low potential, low performance, low potential, high performance. So you have 4 groups. The high potential, high performance group was off feed 45 days sooner than the low potential, low performance group. So think about if those were all in the same pen together, the variation there inside of that group and what that does to your overall lot profitability.
Well, in
right?
general, yeah, you would manage them completely different with technologies, but also in a lot of instances, you would have to terminal sort. And there are many yards who do not terminal sort because they just do not have the opportunity to. They don't have the pen space to leave those cattle in there. They got to kick them out, get the pen cleaned, and bring the next group in.
Yep.
But knowing that right off the bat, that, hey, these ones are likely going to need 45 days less, you're going to resort and restructure those pens to have that group with other
I hope so.
animals in the yard.
Also, just your implant and beta agonist strategy would
Absolutely.
be completely different, right? And that'll get your full potential. And
Absolutely.
Get your genomic potential.
See, and I want to make it clear that we didn't. So when I talk about the $80 in value, we didn't do that part. All we did was we sorted them different, but they were on largely the same treatment plan. They were on largely the same implant strategy. It was really the only thing we were able to study is time on feed, right? But if you were able to sit down at weaning time and say, before, because we tested them at backgrounding, so before they ever hit the finish yard, we had it. But if you knew it before they went into the background yard, I mean, just think about that as well. I mean, that additional time you could save if you know going into it that, hey, these calves weaned heavier and they've got good genetic potential. Let's get these things firing right away. And what are we going to do with these low performers? Maybe there's an option there. We keep them on grass or whatever it is. I don't run or manage feed yards, so I can't say. But all I know is that there are opportunities to maximize value on all 4 of those quartiles, so to speak, to really maximize your top end and bring value to your bottom end, where they'd be your losers, then they'd drag your overall lot performance down otherwise.
And then how to market those animals at the end of the feeding period as well.
But I think what's interesting, what you're saying, like, as much as you've adopted genomics, it's test but verify. Even what you're saying now, and this comes back to your point about by weigh scale, right? Like, test but verify. And I think that's not a huge investment these days. It's getting much easier. Like, that's why we developed our app, is to make sure that it was super easy for people to do stuff. But the alternative to that also is build a relationship with your feed yard. Your feed yard has a weigh scale. They're weighing them in on induction. Like, you can get effectively those weaning weights on the backgrounding yard without having to put one on the ranch. So, like, there's other ways for you to be able to do that and do private treaty deals and all of that, which, there's lots of different opportunities there, but it is that test but verify. So spend your $30 on the test, but how do ranchers then verify? Because it's your ranch, right? Like, you are making an investment. How do you test your return on investment?
Yeah, and we've tried to position ourselves, and I think universities play a role here too. And I'd love to be able to go to my customers today and say, we've done the testing and verification for you, right? You're welcome to test and verify as well, but you don't have to be the guinea pig here, right? You've got university research that shows this. We've got our own research that shows that, this is how we would suggest handling this, so that you don't feel by the time we got all through this that you really didn't get the value you should have. Because if you approach this not knowing how to do it, you won't get the value. You will say, why did I just spend this $30? Because I tested my heifers, but then I didn't sort. Well, what was the point? Why did you do that? Or I tested all these steers, but I sold them all as one lot to the feedlot. Well, that you just wasted that money, right? So it's having someone that's got the experience, kind of like we do in that role that we try to play as consultants. Of, okay, there's more to this than just buying a test. There's leveraging it to select your heifers. There's leveraging it to place these feeder cattle the right way. Another thing we haven't talked about is leveraging that genomic data to pick your bulls the right way. Right? Because that's the main thing we focus on really, is if this is the genetic profile of your cow herd, here's the bulls we would recommend you use. Or tell us where you want your cow herd to go based on where it's at. And these are the bulls we're going to recommend you use. And we're positioned really well for that because we have 6,000 of the things on inventory. It is impossible that we don't have a bull that will help you, right? If we don't, we've not done our jobs, right? So it kind of takes you. Cody likes to say, my grandfather Martin, very well known in the industry, and he was a very driven man and knew what he wanted, and he knew what other people should do. And so when you bought a bull from Martin Jorgensen, it was, you buy this bull and you use him because I say he's good, and that worked.
Yeah.
But we're not in that position anymore. Now we say you should buy or lease this bull because we can show you he's the exact right one that does what your cow herd needs, right? And he might not be the best bull for your neighbor because his herd is different and his desires are different and his outcomes that he wants are different. So we're not going to recommend that bull to him. We're going to recommend this bull to you because it's exactly what you need to move your herd forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think as we look at seed stock producers around the country, right, that the better ones are helping the customers market their calves and some of those things and being a good bull supplier, but have they really taken that next step and working with their customers on their customers' heifers and genomic profiles and helping them select the right bulls and I think that's just another tier of these elite seed stock producers that are going to do that. And so I think that's a really good point. And that's where some of these are going to have to head in order to compete with the Jorgensen landing cattle.
Well, ultimately, Jim, the goal here, right, is to help our customers make more money by way of producing better progeny, right? And putting better, more consistent beef into the beef system. And we feel strongly about it because our impact is so big, right? Just with the sheer volume
Your footprints
of seed stock and bulls that we're putting out there and the sheer volume of calves that are being produced, we can actually move the needle, right? If we do this right, we can make a noticeable difference inside of a, maybe not on the industry as a whole, but inside of a supply chain or a relationship that we have, we can move the needle.
And linking back to, like, we had Lamar on a previous podcast, like, consistency and story and message and everything else that comes through that, and people can go back and listen to that. But it's like, what we've seen that's exciting is working with seed stock producers like yourself, is that the retailers then you then talk to, or the packers you then talk to, like, you've got the story, you've got the known genetics, you've got that ability to adjust year on year. Like, that whole story, I think we underestimate what this can do for a retailer and for a consumer, right, in terms of what they can buy and what they can get. But, and it's not going to be, 200,000 cattle is great, but, the Walmarts of the world buy 6 million. So it's going to have to be seed stock people working together to get enough volume to tell this story.
I just don't think there's another piece in the chain that's better positioned to help with that than the seed stock producer. I think it has to be the seed stock producer. Zoetis can't do it because, Zoetis, isn't a vassal of Jorgensen Land and Cattle. They can't recommend our bulls or the right bull. They can't do that. The feedlot can't really, because, well, a lot of times they don't get all the data from the cow-calf producer. And also, it could very well seem like they're trying to serve their own ends and that, I want this kind of thing coming into my lot. We're there at the end of the day to market bulls. And if we can better do that by sitting down with our customer and saying, this is the path we agree we should all go down. Here's the bulls we recommend that can get you there. Here's the heifers that we think are going to serve that purpose for you. I think we're the best positioned for it.
In the beef business, every decision counts. Drovers delivers the expert analysis, market updates, and real-world reporting that cattle producers rely on to make smart, profitable decisions. From market updates to policy shifts and animal health, Drovers delivers expert reporting and real-world analysis that helps producers stay ahead. With a mission to help beef producers become more profitable, every story is built around what matters most to the cattle industry. Get informed. Get Drovers.
Nick, if we've got listeners or viewers here that look at this and say, well, is this going to work for me? I'm sure of the 6,000 bull customers that you have out there on an annual basis, you've got varying sizes of operations, right? And so speak to us a little bit about, how it might help the smaller producer as well as the larger producer, and where, if someone's listening, where they can kind of fit into something like this that might help them as well.
Yeah. So we've got a whole range that test. We've got one customer who's been faithfully testing his 13 heifers every year for the last 5 or 6 years. And I actually, in my opinion, it's the most critical for him, because one mistake with 13 replacement heifers is a lot worse than one bad heifer out of 1,000. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? She's going to have a lot more bigger material impact percentage wise. And so it's there's no bottom end, right? You can test one if you want, as long as you're going to manage with it. And then we've got.
It'd be hard to cull that one though if you don't.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Well, yeah, that takes you down a whole other discussion.
Maybe worth culling her and going buying one from somebody else.
Well, seriously though, it takes you down a whole other discussion of if producers should be retaining their heifers or if they should be going out and buying developed, genetically sorted heifers. But we don't have to go there today. And then we've got customers all the way up to one ranch this year that tested 1,200 heifers, and the idea is the same. We just show me. They ask the question in inverse. They don't say show me the top 70%. They say please give me a list of the bottom 30%. I want to go sort through those, and I want to make sure that I don't keep all of those. Really, give me that list. It's the process is the same. You got to pull the DNA. We got to get it to the lab. Results got to come back to us. But whether it's one bull or 300, we can make the same recommendation. You know what I mean? So as far as size goes, Jim's, I don't think there's I think that's a separate discussion.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So another question might be that a viewer might have is hey, I'm a purebred breeder. Is a genetic evaluation right for my operation? And what do you tell those guys?
I think it's the most important
Yeah.
for a purebred breeder to fully understand their genomics, right? Because they're at the top of a chain that influences several generations of cattle down, right? And those genetics are going to propagate, right? Commercial herds they propagate, but not to the degree that a purebred herd does. Now, am I saying that the genetic evaluation that Angus has isn't good? No, I mean I suggest you leverage that but I think you absolutely should, because there's a whole piece there that if we only talk about phenotype, you're missing half the equation, right? And genetics to some degree can find things that you will miss. You will miss things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. So as we sort of wind down, what's next for Jorgensen Land and Cattle? I don't want you to give up any intellectual property or anything like that, but sort of you've been very open. I mean, where do you see the future with this? Maybe additional traits that you are thinking about exploring or whatever, and then where do you want to go with the customer buyback program, and do you see at some point like Lamar fitting into more of a supply chain situation?
Yeah. So from a trait perspective, I mean, we're always looking at new traits, right? And like I said at the beginning, what it really comes down to is, do we have the phenotypic data to support trait development, right? So just as an example, we and some of our cooperator herds collect calving phenotypes, not just birth weights, but the cow's disposition at calving, the calf's vigor at birth, teat and udder scores, things like that at birth, with the idea of having this suite of calving traits. And we haven't developed them yet because we don't have the phenotypes, right? It takes several thousand of these, and a lot of times 5,000 to 10,000 observations. We just haven't gotten there yet. So as we're gathering that data, we'll roll traits out like that. And I'll say one more time that having access to a strong R&D team that Zoetis has given us access to has been pivotal for standing up some of those unique traits, because I don't know how to do it. I wouldn't have the slightest clue, right? So that having that good partner has been really, really good. Now, speaking about the future as it just relates to Jorgensen Land and Cattle and our customers and our system, we've been talking for years about this pool of calves is so big, and you mentioned consistency. Building a relationship end to end, right, from cow calf to retailer or to packer, in our opinion, is where this needs to go. Now, when we originally started, we said, well, are we just going to do this? And it became clear to us pretty early on, we're not cattle feeders. I don't want to be a cattle feeder, right? We're a seed stock producer. So it's finding the right partner that can connect those dots. And I'll make a plug for Breedr. We're working with them on, help us align our customers, with whether it's a feed yard or wherever it goes, but aligning that supply, I think could have a really big impact on our customers' behalf. So that's where I see it going, and that shouldn't be a surprise. There's lots of other people trying to do the same thing, right? But I think where our uniqueness and just the scale and access to, like you said, maybe it's not 200,000, but maybe there's a supply chain where 25 or 30 or 50,000 of those wind up going to one place. I think that's where I'd like to see things go.
Yeah. It's interesting as we move into consumers wanting more, ranch of origin stories or story beef type things. I mean, that, the Jorgensen Land and Cattle is a great story to connect with those customers and in your customers from there. So yeah, it's a fascinating aspiration that you got.
Yeah. And it's harder than I thought it would be. You know what I mean? And I think it's just our industry has operated one way for so long. You know, when you try and shake that up, it's not easy to shake that tree.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's interesting though, like, you know, it's these baby steps, and, you know,
Yeah.
how do you build a mountain one rock at a time, right? So, and I think, you know, gradually before you know it, we're starting to see those changes come through, and people are starting to see the value of that data being connected through the supply chain and getting that sort of full circle back of what they're doing. But yeah, I think I'm completely off topic. Again, we might cut this out, but it's like one of the topics we haven't talked about at all, and we've got a later podcast on this, is succession. I'm really interested, just to go completely off topic for a second, Nick, and like, there's a lot of the things we're seeing out there is like part of this innovation is generational change. And it takes it back to the culture point early on, but like, how have you guys done so well as an organization at succession planning? Like, it just seems like it was seamless. It just like, pop, done, no problems, no arguments. And even though your family still didn't argue. So, but maybe that's the outside in.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I mean, it is, but I will say we've been very deliberate about it. And I don't know how to explain how it's been so easy. Probably if I was going to sum it up, it goes back to well, maybe even my great-grandfather. So, and I don't want to make this be a long, drawn-out story, but my great-grandfather got arthritis young. And so he, you know, back in the 30s and 40s, I mean, it was all operations. And so my grandfather, Martin, was brought into the operation at a really young age in a decision-making capacity. And I think he learned that, and then he set that expectation for everyone else further down the chain, right? So Greg came back, and he got to make decisions. He got to be involved, and Martin ceded some decision-making ability to him. Brian came back, hearing the same thing. Cody came back, he got that. I came back, and I mean, you guys, I'm not bragging about this, but they made me CEO. I'm the CEO to my dad and my uncle and my cousin. Now, it means something different than a typical CEO, but the point is, there's never been an issue in our family of transitioning decision-making authority to the younger generation, right? And so, you know, Brian and Greg might look at some of the stuff Cody and I are talking about from a genomics perspective and say, I don't get that. I wouldn't do that if it was me, but it's you. So go right ahead. You know, you guys do what you think is right. But so there's that portion of it that I really had no control over. It was, I got to chalk it up to grandfather Martin, just putting that mentality there. But we're also very deliberate about transitioning equity, transitioning decision-making authority, setting up the structure in our business to enable that type of thing. And like you said, totally different conversation, but I think a key to our success is we've had a third party involved for the last 6 to 7 years. Not because we needed one, because, you know, you say, whoa, like a mediator, like you guys needed someone to come in to make sure things didn't go off the handle, and it's not that. But when you're dealing with family, right, emotions can get high. I mean, you think about the way, you know, you talk to your son and the way I talk to my son someday, and, you know, it's just the way it goes. But when there's a third party in the room, I'm less likely to fly off the handle at, or, you know, or get upset or, you know, bring things up. You're just going to behave more professionally. And that third party isn't there to serve an agenda. He's just to keep the conversation going. Cause that's another problem with succession is it gets hard. There are hard things you have to discuss. And it's really easy for you and me to get into that conversation and reach a point and we just say, we're going to stop. We're going to stop talking about this. We're not getting anywhere. Having a third party there, he might say, no, we've got to get over this hump. So let's figure out what we got to do to get there. And that's been key from our opinion, in my opinion.
So just to clarify on the third party, is that a hired third party, or that's not a partner third party?
No, it's a hired consultant. And listen, I'm not saying everyone has to do this, but concept. You know, our business got to the size and scale where you know, we needed someone to advise us on you know, how do we manage this thing? How do we set it up organizationally for success? How do we make sure that this equity continues to move generationally and we don't get ourselves in a situation where, and I'm not throwing stones at anyone, right? But the worst thing that could happen in my opinion is, you know, 90-year-old grandma or grandpa has all the equity and, you know, 60-year-old son is a hired man. And just that to me, that's very unfortunate because that person just, work their whole career as a hired man and maybe gets to see the fruits of that by the time they should be retiring.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's making sure that we don't get into that scenario.
It's just interesting because this is the Future of Beef show. We're talking about how it's changing more rapidly now than it ever has.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at what you guys have done, and it's full credit to your grandfather and that culture that's been set, because like it's not only has he bred succession, he's bred innovation that's come on that, and it seems to have kept going generation to generation.
Yeah.
So
and it's a big problem in our industry. It really, really is. And everyone said for years, we're going to come up on this wall and all this equity's got to transition. And maybe it will always find a way to do it. But, to maximize success for that family, I don't think a lot of families in ranching and farming and ranching have been deliberate about it. And it's going to cause real problems and real heartache for some of those people.
Yeah. And we're heading down a rabbit trail, but I think you see it. You see, first generation, second generation. By the time a lot of times it gets to that third generation, I mean, they split it up or whatever. And I think you're right. I think it's really taking all those interests and how do you transition in an appropriate way, and look forward to that future podcast too.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to continue to eat this time up, but you mentioned the splitting, right? That is the exact opposite of where our industry is going today. Right. So in a time where you're looking at operations getting bigger and more efficient and consolidation, and then these families are setting themselves up to do the opposite, you're setting that next generation up for failure, right? Because just the capital alone that it takes in agriculture today, if you take and split that in half, you lose more than half that capacity. You see what I mean? Like you split your ability in more than half, right? Because you don't have the resources. It's harder to find the people. It's just, it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, you're dividing your efficiencies.
Yes, you're dividing your efficiencies.
Yep.
Yeah, I was, Nick, really quick on that topic. When you were right out of high school or whatever, I don't know what you did in that time, but your parents, did you work for other companies or did internships or anything like that?
No, I never did.
Yeah.
After I graduated undergrad, I got a master's in economics and then an MBA, but it was
every summer you went back to the
every
operation.
Summer on the weekends. Never once, except maybe when I was real little, had a desire to go anywhere or do anything else. Now I've been really lucky just professionally. I sit on a couple boards and I get to do stuff like this. Like not very many people get to be involved in conversations like this. So, that exposure to things external to Jorgensen Land and Cattle, we get a lot of that, right? So we don't just live in, in a Jorgensen Land and Cattle pipe, so to speak. But no, never had a desire to work.
So you just picked rocks in summer as well, like I did.
We don't have rocks.
Oh, that's a shame.
No rocks. No rocks.
Cold water.
That's all I did was pick rocks.
Yeah, cold water. Yep.
So, well, Nick, it's been a real pleasure having you on the Future of Beef show today, and we really enjoyed the conversation. A lot of insights, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. It's time for Ian, Jess, and I to go behind the beef. All right. So following up on that interview, that was a lot of fun, wasn't it?
No, I love that. I get my heart pings when we start talking about succession and what they've done there, but like we should focus on the genomics side.
Yeah, we really should, because I think that's a good topic. I do too. I'm with you on that. But no, a lot of fun. Maybe a few things just to sort of dive a little deeper into that we talked about that might need a little further explanation. But what are some of the things you thought about?
Yeah, look, from my side, it's really interesting to see, and just to hear why they went their own way. That's always the thing in the industry is like, yeah, but Jorgensens have gone their own way on their evaluations. But to hear sort of why they did that and why they're getting better data and how that helps them really drive decisions, I think it's really interesting. And as Nick said, it's not to say the Angus one's bad. I mean, the Angus one's got a lot better as they've done more on genomics and everything, and is a really good starting point for people. But or Red Angus or Charolais, or better not leave out the Charolais, guys. But they're all doing a lot of stuff, and all these evaluations are getting better. But I think there's still like this disconnect between what a seed stock understands about EPDs and genomics and what a cow-calf or commercial cow-calf guy operation understands, or even now just what a feed yard understands about genomic EPDs. Like, and I think, how do we break that down? How do we help them? I think is the thing that really comes to mind.
Yeah, I think it's important as we look at, and I was thinking the same thing, as we look at what those things are. We talked about genetic evaluations. We talked about genomics. We talked about EPDs, right? And so what does that mean for seedstock commercial feed yards, right? I mean, essentially all those combine to a prediction and a ranking of cattle. And that's really the basics of it, right? It's just, how do we rank these cattle within a population? And in a genetic evaluation, really, the efforts are to collect all this data and filter out the environmental effects, so we can get truly to the genetics of the animals and of the animals within the population. And then we rank those based on genetics. Now, you'll see in a feed yard, we might have, and we talked about it in some other episodes, that, you know, how that animal expresses its genetics really depends on how it's managed.
Absolutely.
And what opportunities it has to express those. You can suppress those genetics if you don't manage the animal right.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, knowing the genetic profile of an animal allows you to make those management decisions in a different way. And, you know, we brought up implants and beta agonists earlier in the episode, and you may manage the lower 25% of your pen different than you're going to manage the upper 25% of your pen, or you may market them differently. And I think the most critical thing is, how do we connect the seed stock all the way to the feedlot, and how do we make sure that there is that flow of information? We can get the genomic information on a calf at birth, but then how does that actually end up in the feedlot, and how can we use it to better beef production, make us more sustainable, reduce days on feed, increase pounds that are on the rail, all these different opportunities. But how do we transfer that information?
Yeah, I've always been an advocate, and we haven't seen it yet, and hopefully someday we do, but I've always been an advocate of a common currency, right? Something that you know, a seed site person can select his cattle on, that'll transfer to a commercial person, that'll improve profitability there, that then transfers to a feeder who can buy, sort, or whatever they need to do on that end. So understanding those numbers from seed stock to feeder, I think is really important, and being able to have a common currency that flows up and down that cycle is important.
And certainly, like, we've seen that, like, you know, with the technology side of things, it's like, some of this is not the fact that people don't understand it's got value. It's just how hard it is to implement. Like, they don't have a weigh scale, or they're not processing it through a chute. So, you know, so much of we've seen now is like, it's really about ease of use. You know, if you want adoption in this area, it's like, how does the animal arrive on the feed yard and it's already got that genomic profile up there? So when they're doing that first sort within 2 or 3 days of arriving, they've got it, right? And that can be done through testing on the ranch. It can be done through testing on the backgrounding yard. You know, that there's many, you can even do it at your, you know, second implant, or as they come through. But, you know, how you put that and it's shown at the chute as they come through is super, super important. And I think, and how you capture data to verify, I think, is super, super important. But that feedback loop then starts to come into place, and that sort of full circle that comes around. But yeah, look, I liked the way Nick positioned it as like top quartile, bottom quartile, you know, high growth. And he, like, what I was super impressed about, despite doing all these genomics, is his emphasis on phenotype is still really there, right? Like, this isn't one or the other. Like, you hear people out there going, well, I don't want to do it all genotype. That gets me bad feet. No, he has a great balance between phenotype and genotype, which is, I thought, was super impressive.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You know, he talked about the top quarter and the bottom quarter making, it was like $80 a head or something like that, which is really interesting. But now, how does he use that information to say, all right, this is the bull that you need to buy that gets this $80 a head premium over here, right? And being able to communicate that information up and down the supply chain is.
But also that $80 a head, that's before, I'm pretty sure in that study he hasn't put them on a different grid. He hasn't done different implant strategies.
Right.
And so, like, you might put that $80 to a high prime grid. You might put the bottom one onto an NHT. You might not give them an implant and put them onto a NHTC or a grid or something like that, where you're getting your value in another way.
Mm-hmm.
And, whether that makes sense or doesn't make sense is interesting, but it's like, you can just think so differently about how you market those if you know that information, and that bell curve can tighten and move up and right for every one of those lots. So
actually, one of my favorite things was the ability for their operation to select the bulls earlier and call them earlier into feedlot cattle, because I've seen it time and time again, poor performance data on bulls that were late cut going into the feedlot, and it's harder on them than we think it is, especially from a marbling standpoint and an overall growth performance standpoint. So that was super valuable.
Yeah, and I think, we've talked about it before, but I think the earlier you do a genetic or genomic profile or test on an animal, the more decisions you have the opportunity to make on that animal, right? So we talked about in that, doing it at branding, and once you get that information back, you have more opportunities for decisions than if you did one at yearling or, at weaning or whatever.
First loss is the best loss, right? Like that's
exactly like a suckling calf implant. Give it out at branding so you have time to get back your gain.
Mm-hmm.
Don't put it in at the end of right before you're about to ship them.
Right.
You want to make the pounds in your operation. You want to have the opportunity to make the best decisions with that calf for your operation.
Yeah. And the best cost to gain is that younger calf, right?
Yes.
Like there's no doubt about that. And so you want to get that on your operation. That's really important. But, one of the things I was thinking about as Nick was speaking at the end there, they've done so much around sort of the maternal and the cow, because that's where they work with the cow-calf. I think it's going to be interesting as they start to move into these supply chains of what they can now start doing on terminal traits as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's just, listening to them speak, there's opportunity there for seed stock operations, and definitely from what Nick said, getting more terminal traits into that as well. And how do you build out enough good data that's consistent within that terminal trait side of things as well?
Well, it's interesting. I think as he has the opportunity to discover new traits, they have the flexibility to do things that I think you said it in a previous episode that is it, do we look at yearling weight or is it finished weight?
Mm-hmm.
Is it marbling at, somebody said it, is it marbling at this age, or is it marbling at a year?
Mm-hmm.
There's some of those things
right.
that as you get into a supply chain type scenario, that are we measuring the right traits that, on these seed stock cattle that then translate to feeder cattle and finished cattle? Is it are we really measuring the right traits? And I think that's going to be an important
I know I said it during
question
Troy's,
to
but
ask.
I have this big campaign on time to marble. That makes such a big difference in sustainability. If we've got something like a Wagyu that marbles at 30 months versus saying that marbles at 15, that is going to be such a big difference in terms of quality beef and sustainability and age to slaughter and all of that sort of stuff that happens. So maybe I'll win this battle one day, but I think it's
I think it's an interesting question, right? I think it's an interesting question to ask, and how do we are we measuring the right things from a seed stock standpoint? We typically just measure weaning and yearling weight and ultrasound at yearling and some of those things, and are we really looking at the right traits?
Well, and I think, just circling back to the EPD thing, Jim, we're going to have to get you to put a little video explaining EPDs on the Future Beef Academy website. So, there's futurebeef.com. We'll get a link across in the show notes.
That sounds good. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Future of Beef Show. Don't forget to check us out at thefutureofbeef.com with a free trial to Breedr app to take your operation to the next level. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe, share it with your friends, and leave us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Until next time, keep your boots on the ground and keep your eyes on the future.